Thanks for joining today's second in the series of 3 webinars that is sponsored by GVW along with the Pastoria Alliance to help entitled Creating a More Intelligent Pharmaceutical Industry, Enabling Data Regulatory Data Exchange. If you go to the next slide. So as data standards are being set through ISO, we see that there is a revolutionizing the way data will be exchanged going forward within the pharma. And today's webinar, we're going to be listening to a couple of case studies from industry and you know the benefit that they bring in helping patients. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, please. Today, the webinar has been organized by Louis Hendricks, who's the CEO and founder of Global Value Web, Dr. Srinidhi Ramachandran, and myself, who support GVW. And Louis will be joining us later for the panel discussion that we have planned. So if you go to the next slide. So in the first webinar, we covered some foundational information that helps people understand what is this and why will companies need to be doing this and align to this in the future. So we learned that the IDMP and the GSRS are ISO-based frameworks driving global regulatory alignment and really will produce a digital transformation, especially in enabling structured data to be sent to the health authorities. The GSRS ensures consistent substance identification, and what is really great is that regulators and industry are collaborating on this tool and really going to help make that very seamless for the future. And with these data, really the end focus is on patient safety and ultimately will drive some regulatory efficiency because you'll be able to reuse the data, mine it much more quickly, and at the end of the day, that will help ensure that patients have the best safety outcomes possible if there are issues. And given that these ISO standards are being adopted globally, and in the case of the data platform, the GSRS, it will allow for quicker and seamless data exchange. And then the ISO standard adoption promotes internal regulatory convergence, meaning that more and more health authorities are using the same sets of regulations, and it will help enable faster market access, and also from a pharmacovigilance perspective will help with that as well. And the IDMP implementation is phased, starting with foundational substances, data such as substances and organizations, and eventually will progress to a full product data integration. On the next slide, Christian Hay gave a really great talk and really gave the foundation of the ISO IDMP standards. And on the right side of the slide, we see what is referred to as the wedding cake model that helps folks understand how all the data is really related to one another and how it will be integrated going forward. And when that all is accomplished, it allows for really quickly finding the information that is needed for the same substance or the same drug product that may be made by many companies. Next. Then we had Dr. Marlene Kim, who is an expert with the Global Substance Registration System, and she provided us information and some background on the system that many regulators and industry are using to upload their information on the compounds and impurities and degradants that are found in those substances, and really what are some of the globalization impacts that are being felt by this, but again, with the convergence of many regulators using and industry members using the platform, how that will drive efficiency for health authority uh, figures around the world. Next slide. We also heard from Dr. Bertha Nielsen from the Pastoria Alliance, and there she was mentioning how one of the strategic priorities is this integration of data and really pushing and helping to align health authorities, organizations, and industry along the lines of common data structure. And the ISO documents really help provide that, and they have been really a catalyst in trying to help pull this together with support from industry and the health authorities to, again, really drive it being the official standard that companies and health authorities will use, and really drive its integration into our day-to-day operations. Next. So today we have two speakers, Dr. Olof Lagerlund from the Uppsala Monitoring Center, and Ian Maurer from GlaxoSmithKline. And if you go to the next slide. So I'd first like to introduce Olof. He is currently working as a substance expert at the Uppsala Monitoring Center, working with the WHO drug dictionaries that are used for the identification of medicinal products and safety monitoring, and engaging in various efforts for global implementation of the ISO standard for medicinal product information. He has a master's in pharmacy and a doctorate in pharmaceutical science with a focus on medicinal chemistry. So, Olof, welcome, and I will hand to you now.
Thank you. I'll see if
next
I can.
Slide. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. We can take the next slide directly, I think. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar to say a few words. And as Joe was mentioning that this was for the pharmaceutical industry and how we can implement this for regulators, since I don't really represent the industry or a regulator, but we're somewhere with an, as I come to here on the slide, independent self-funded non-profit foundation. I will give you the other spectrum and why we would like to have the SRS system and what that would help us, and with the IDMP and their different, the implementation of standardization worldwide. So I'll give you an introduction to UMC and why we are working towards where we are, and how we will use this, and then how we work together. And some things will probably be repetition from last webinar, and some probably Ian will mention when he talks about GSK, because there are things there, but might be some things here that's more applicable only to like this sort of thing. So you can use the SRS for a lot of reasons. But first, Uppsala Monitoring Center. It's an independent, self-funded, non-profit foundation, as I said. We are a WHO collaborating center and running the operations for the WHO Program for International Drug Monitoring. And that was established as an agreement between the Swedish government and the World Health Organization. So we're not WHO, even if we are closely working with them in some parts of the spectrum. And in the program for international drug monitoring, that is like the pharmacovigilance part, we have 180 member countries and regions in the program. So we help them with support, and we maintain Vigibase, which is the WHO global database of adverse event reports. We also, when we've done this, as I'll come back to, with a WHO Drug Global, we have introduced and standardized a lot of medicinal product information throughout these 45 years plus that we have been working on in this field with pharmacovigilance. And next slide, please. Yes, so a little bit more about the program. We are running the program and collect all these reports in Vigibase, as I said. And we have over 40 million anonymized reports from these 180 member countries. And all of these are mapped to our global dictionary, WHO Drug Global, standardized medicinal products, and both medicines and vaccines, which then you can do as for analysis and so on for data. So, but what does this mean for the SRS? I'll get back to that later on. But first, I would like you also take a look at the numbers, which I think has an impact on why we are here today as well. We have about 40 million reports, but 8 million are vaccine reports, like a fifth. But about 70% of those have to do with COVID, and that is they came in like after 2020. So it's like 5 years ago it started, and you can see this huge amount for like how much reporting it was. And one thing that was discovered during this time, IDMP has started earlier, 2012, and as Christian mentioned before, that was first published, but there was still a lot of need that's not really harmonized out there. Not everyone was implementing. But we can go to the next slide. And one of the big challenges we have when we were dealing with this were the different level of names, terms that come in that we need to code to the same thing. And it was really a stressful time for a lot of regulators. We know that, and for everyone else as well, but they approved without maybe a proper name, and it was very common for in these adverse event reports or even other places just have like Pfizer COVID vaccine. And it doesn't really tell you that much. In the beginning, it was only one, and then you could have the Moderna, but then it grew, and you had varieties of these vaccines. You could have one valence or two valence. So it's really that if everyone uses different naming, for instance, or different, how do we know that we are looking at the same thing? And if you're a regulator and you have a drug that's going to be approved, maybe you have a couple of years to ask the pharmaceutical, the industry to get back to you with a nice structure for that specific drug. But if you're in this hurry, it might be not. Or for our part, we can't go back and ask, what did you really mean? Because we don't, this is what we get most of the time. Sometimes we just get like COVID-19 vaccine, and sometimes we get the Comirnaty, the trade name. So we have a lot of information on it. But we always, and then you can have language variations as well, of course. So we always try to standardize these names to like connect them to the most specific information that we have. But it's not always that easy. And this we have done traditionally through our UMC Drug Dictionary, the WHO Drug Global. I'll show a few words on that on the next slide. And basically, WHO Drug Global, if you take a look, so it's we have vaccines and medicines, and it's for identification purpose. We have trade name connected to which substance, and then we try to have the substance with synonyms for different reasons in different languages, for instance, and so on. And it was initially developed for the post-market safety monitoring and to be able to code all these reports that we have in Vigibase. But we also have it as a that you can buy and use it, and we have a couple of thousand of 3,600 customers, a lot of users, a lot of countries that use it, that we get drug names from and cover it. A lot of unique drug names and vaccines. And we put everything in there that we can get on a report, basically. Not medical devices, for instance, but everything that you could consider a medicinal product. And that can differ from country to country. So sometimes what one country would say purely cosmetic, maybe borderline in another country and so on. So we have a lot in there. And maybe not everything we have would live up to the ISO IDMP standards. And that's what I'll get back to. We can take the next slide, please. So getting back to Christian's wedding cake, maybe not his only, but it's very good. And specifically focusing on the substances today. And it is like I said that US FDA, EMA, they started with this implementation of the IDMP. You know, they didn't wait until after the COVID. They started before, like 2012, when they started to develop the SRS system, for instance, and how they've gone with different implementation projects like SPORE. But as we are a global organization, and we see that from countries around the world now, we get after COVID, we really got an increase in that a lot of them understood that they needed more standardized data because it wasn't really up to task. So that's why IDMP comes in handy, since this is a standard that we started working with. To be even more making the shift from non-standardized to standardized. And we can go to the next slide. And here I just wanted to show it's a IDMP landscape. It's probably my view of it, or similar. You could have your favorite organizations up there, I guess. But we have UMC up to the right corner, where we are a global ID maintenance organizations, because we will take care of the global substance ID and the PHP ID, and I'll get back to both of these later on. We have, if you continue clockwise, we go down and we have like the Pistoia Alliance. I put them there, SRS Consortium, because I think having substance data expressed and created in a similar way that we agree upon, like it's the ISO standard, but then you should implement the standard, and it's always, you can have small interpretations and small differences, but the more we can align, the better it is for this community. And that's why it's also great to have these sort of webinars, so we can discuss these type of things. And there we also have the implementations like the EU-SRS, the FDA GSRS, and how they collaborate the different way. But of course, when you do this, you notice stuff. Maybe there's something that needs to be updated in the different standards like the ISO or the HL7 messaging services for IDMP. That's not really, because standards has life cycles of their own. So they will get, the implementation phase will provide input for the standards, which then can be reviewed when that cycle comes and be implemented even better, get the feedback. And then we have ICH and IPRP and ICMA and other global, where they take the decisions on a higher level to use this type of standards, for instance. And finally, up on the top, we have GIDWIG, which is a global IDMP working group, and it's really for implementation and to set the stage to be able to start on the global level. As I said before, like both EMA and FDA and Brazil and a lot of countries have programs and companies for implementation on a local, regional level, but maybe not the global level hadn't be there, but the standards was so we really could exchange globally. So I think that's really good that we started getting this Pistoia SRS consortium going, so we can even further develop the substance and system. Let's take the next slide. Maybe an important one today, or at least why do we, UMC, want to have the GSRS software? Well, I told you about Hoodrag, and we had Hoodrag for 40 years plus, and we have a lot of information on substances in there, on medicinal products. So what's the difference? Well, the information that we have in the database is limited. We didn't have structures, for instance. We relied on getting structures from other parts, like via CAS numbers or other UNIs or other identifiers. But to be fully ISO compliant, we also need to have that to be able to show that this is really paracetamol that we're talking about, having that structure or the information. And it's also very much needed to avoid duplicates, is one thing we have seen over the years, that you get one company code or similar, and it can be, and if you get two things that are very similar and maybe are duplicates, you would still want them to be either separate if they are, or the same if they are the same. And this is typical, otherwise you do the analysis on the wrong material, so to speak. And in this database, you can have both structures, you can have the sequences, you can have the modifications either as a specific amino acid replaced in a sequence, for instance, or you could make changes, notes, you could do a lot of things. And the more standardized it is, the more controlled vocabularies you use, and we use the same across the globe, the better, because it will be easier to exchange data and to see that we actually are using the same substances. So that's one thing. And the classification I wrote here as a headline, and it's real that you have hierarchies. You can have a salt-based relationships, like you can have the ibuprofen, and then you can have the ibuprofen potassium or the sodium beneath that. You can also have other types of relationships. You could have the targets, or you could have inhibition, CYP inhibition target, or you can put a grouping around them that these are diabetic medications, for instance. So there's a lot of versatile things you can do if you want to. Of course, it will take time and effort and so on for the user. So that's one thing. And it's also that it's readily available. You can start using it today. Just download it. Now, I'm not the technical guy, so don't ask me exactly how we do it and if it's super easy or just easy. But you can start using it. And you can also use that to exchange data via the import-export functions quite easily when you have the JSON files from the SRS system. And I'll come back to that in a minute as well. And our plan, we will use it as a substance master data, where we then have all the necessary information to have these be ISO compliant in that sense, that we follow the 11238. And we will have it for Hoodrag. Maybe it's not necessary all the time to have all that data. We will still have some weird stuff in there that's not going to be easy to put into the SRS system. But we will have the as a means to produce the global substance identifier. And I'll come back to that, of course. It's also very good for us. We're quite a small team. Not everyone are trained chemists, for instance, or worked in the pharmaceutical industry. So getting these warnings and duplication checks that are built in the system is really valuable, because it makes it easy to handle. And then if you get something and you're not sure, you can always go to a colleague and ask, or try to look it up, or investigate. So it's good for, even if it's somewhat not always easy to start using it, when you get around that, you get these warnings, and then you don't have to be an expert in all when just entering the data. But of course, you need to have your rules, etc., and set up for that. But there are good guides out on the EU has a couple of guides for the different substance type and how they do it, and the US also have guides on how to enter data and so on their homepage. We can really recommend those. Next slide, please. Yes, and this is just to show a snapshot of GSRS. Now we have around 13,000 substances in there. We could, and we have done that to another instance, import like a lot, because from the, as I'll show you on the next slide. But we are trying to keep it a bit slow, and I will talk more about the use case that we have, that we now create the global substance IDs for the PHP IDs. But we've done it for like chemicals, proteins, polymer, nucleic acid. We have rules and we have processes going there. Structural diverse, it's a large substance type group. We have some things for vaccines and herbals and animals. Thoughts about it and how we probably would do it, but we haven't started to do a lot of GSIDs for that. Next slide, please. And as I said, I'm really grateful for the US FDA and that they have a public version of the SRS, because that means that we can import most of the substances that we need. We know that there are substances not in there because they might just be in some other countries, but still it's the main part. And then we can, of course, create one if we need that. And we have to sometimes curate the things we get from the FDA SRS system, but that's more to do with cosmetic things, one could say, like using the INN maybe instead of the USAN name, because of different legislations and jurisdictions. There can be things like that. And we also, I called it isominimal fields here because it fit nicely into the arrows, but it's really, if what you need is you have enough information to say that the substance is a unique, so you can actually assign a unique ID. So if you don't have that, then it gets stuck in this middle box, and then we have it, and maybe as a concept, or maybe as an incomplete record, or we have doubts if it's two of the same. And sometimes for our part, because we are not a regulator, we don't have confidential data. And I'll get back to that a bit more as well towards the end. But then when we have all these, we created like a GSID catalog, like we have all these, like you have the unis or the SMS IDs, for instance, in Europe. And then you can pick that for the, when we do the PHP ID, which is our main use case right now. That doesn't mean we can't have other use cases going forward. Next slide, please. Yes, and just a very short on the construction of the GSID on the actual code. If you are aware, you might be that it's very similar to the Unicode setup, and it's because they use also the same ISO standard when setting up there how to make the code. But ours is a bit longer, and it starts with GSID instead of uni. And this is also to not to confuse them. And we guess that more codes like this, if they are created this way, and then you have to check the first 4 characters to see what qualifier is it. And of course, if different length, it makes it a bit easier. And then you have alphanumeric random number characters built up the middle portion, and then a check digit in the end. But that was very a short thing. Next slide. And as you notice, I talked a lot about the PHP ID, the pharmaceutical product ID that you can read more upon in the 11616 ISO standard. One part of the blue part of the wedding cake, if you have that mentally pictured before you. And if not, you can check it out later. Well, here we have an example. We have 4 different. Yeah, sorry about that. Here we have an example, 4 different products from different countries. We have local medicinal products ID up top. Hopefully you can see it, it's kind of small. But they are, of course, distinct from the different countries because they are set in the country. Same thing with, like, for instance, package ID will also be explicit for the countries. But then we come to these, the PHP ID and the GSID, that will be global. So these 4 packages will have the same pharmaceutical product ID. And of course, since all contain omeprazole, they will also contain the same GSID that is part of the pharmaceutical product ID. So then you can compare these 4 products for different use cases, for instance, drug shortages or maybe cross-border prescription or something. And the pharmaceutical product ID, I'll get back to that, it's next slide as well, is dose form and strength as well. And of course, there might be differences in them for the, like, inactive ingredients, because the pharmaceutical product ID, the PHP ID, only have about the active ingredient. So so that can also always be they can differ in small ways. They can have different sizes on the tablets, etc. But roughly, it's the concept is that they are more or less the same. Then we can take the next slide. And here's just a more, and now it took a vaccine, how it can look, that the pharmaceutical product, the PHP, they have 4 levels. One is just substance, one is substance strength, and the third is dose form strength, and then level 4 is all combined. As you can see here, important thing is that the substance is part of all of these. And if you click one more time, please. Yes, you can see that the GSID, it's the substance, it takes that from the UMC SRS where we created that. So that's a really why we also need this, to really get consistency, so we don't create 2 GSIDs that should be the same, for instance, because then it has effects down the line. But also, when you have all these 4 levels, you can also connect it to your medicinal product dictionary. It can be an in-house in a company, or it can be our like UMC's WHO drug, or a national MPID, for instance, where you can have additional information, what you need around it, like trade names or EMA holders or country of sales, or you can connect your package levels there if the national MPIDs, for instance. And there you also can have your national MPID codes, like the NDC or the PMS code or something like that. So that's our main use case now for that right now. We can take next slide, please. And during our work with assignment, we have of the GSID during these years, and when we discussed this in GID, we have come across that there's a lack of information in the public domain. And that's also the regulators might have the information, but they can't reveal it. The industry can have it, and maybe they could relieve it for us, but there are no processes in place. If, for instance, maybe it's possible that if I asked Ian, he could provide a GSK, but then it's like a one-to-one, and it's not a stable process, and it's not. So that's something. If we need the confidential information to be able to sign a GSID, it's still something we have to solve. But in most cases, we don't need it, because most of the information will be available for a certain extent. But the question is, when then should we have it? Here is a slide you've seen probably in many different shapes and forms over the years. And this one was that we had a discussion in the Citadel setting in Washington, I think 2 years back, and to discuss when do we need different global IDs. And this is not set in stones. This was just a discussion phase. But if we look at the top arrow for the substances, first you start out like you have a company code. Even before that, you probably have a number of lab book note entries, etc. But then you get the company code, and you can use that for most of the times. Then you need to have some sort of regulate code, like the SMS ID if you're gonna do studies in Europe, or if you're gonna do studies in the US, they would need a uni, and similar for different countries. So you would have that. You would also sometimes during this time probably apply for an INN or a name in most cases when it comes to if it's a new product. But when do you need a global substance ID? When are you starting to exchange information between the different regulators, or using the same application and having it mapped? At that time, we thought that maybe start around phase 3 before the market authorization submission, you could have that. But as we know, there are thoughts about creating even more like global application and discussions around that and how you can do that. And maybe this needs to be earlier, but we also know that a lot of information might not be publicly available until we actually get a market authorization, and they are made public through the regulators. So that is something that we can continue to work on how to solve. And then if we look at the pharmaceutical product, that's even later, because if you want to have a consistent PHP ID, you don't want to last minute change, or maybe not last minute, but if you start with one preparation in phase 2 and maybe it changes to phase 3 before moving on, so you want to have it fairly stable with a dose form and strength and so on. So that would probably be a bit later when you actually grant market authorization. And then we had medicinal product here as well. But this is up for discussion. And then final slide. Next one. Yeah, that's. Thank you. And it's always like right now we're focusing, like I said, a lot on the PHP ID and the active ingredients. And we have a number more active ingredients like herbals. We need to have gene therapies, allergens. There's a lot of these that are ongoing discussions on how to exactly express them and get them in there. And we are moving forward, but some takes time. But then we also are discussing and trying to find out to expand what can you use the global substance ID for. One thing that comes up quite often is that we can have inactive ingredients like the excipients in a tablet as a first step. after we had actives, because that would be interesting. We have also seen like controlled substances, for instance, to have it easy to find for customs. Or it could be like in the CMC, the whole part of manufacturing. Maybe that's even more where someone would like a global substance ID to be certain this are buying the same ingredient from different suppliers in different countries, for instance, and regions. Or maybe we should have it on all the metabolites that someone can come up, or that you can get from the pharmacopoeias, for instance, or the targets. The list can go on, and I guess we will see. When we finish this first use case, the PHP ID, then we can continue with that if we have enough interested stakeholders and so on, in which direction we should move and how. Maybe there's one more slide, I think. Yes, and that's just our vision and safe use of medicines and vaccines for everyone everywhere. And by doing this with IDMP and standardize this, we hope we bring that vision a bit forward, even if it's just a small piece of the puzzle. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Olof. We really appreciate your talk. It was very informative. So if we please go to the next slide. And as we're doing that, I just want to remind all the attendees that if you do have questions, to please use the Q&A button to submit any of your questions, and we will be happy to capture those during the panel discussion. But now I'd like to introduce Ian Maurer from GlaxoSmithKline. Ian is a chemist by training, and after university, he worked at MSD in the UK as a research chemist in the neuroscience area. During that time, Ian developed an interest in chemical data management and moved to SmithKline Beecham to work in the chemical registration team. Following the merger to form GSK, he was involved with the registration systems, merging registration systems between the companies, and became the manager of the chemical registration group. And for the last 5 years, he's been working on IDMP, leading the effort to deliver and operationalize GSRS within GSK. So Ian, thank you. And if we can move to the next slide, we welcome you.
Thank you. Just have to put the disclaimer up. The slides are copyright GSK, but please, if you want to use the slides to help you forward your journey with GSRS, please do make use of the slides. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through the problem statement of why we think substance identification is critical, how we're using GSRS within GSK, and looking forward, what we would like to see GSRS become in the future. Next slide, please. So the main problem statement within GSK, why do we need to have substances managed properly? Over the last few years, the complexity of substance information has increased. We've moved away from small molecules easily managed to the larger macromolecules, proteins, vaccine substances, macromolecules, in which the data is much more complex than a small molecule. You have source variability, multiple strains, multiple variants you need to consider in how your macromolecule is being prepared. There's also, in the preparation, for small molecules, it's very simple. For large molecules, you have variation. Production cells may vary. The cell line you use may give you different glycosylation patterns on proteins. You may have different modifications on those proteins. For vaccines, it may be important to consider your process steps. Do you inactivate and then split your vaccine, or do you split and inactivate? Those processes may give you different substance structures, and you need to be able to manage that information. Production parameters may also impact your process, and we know that that is included in the ISO standards, substance standard, as part of specified substances group 4, where you want to take into account the process that produces your substances. Next slide, please. There is a large amount of complexity in the biological substances. You have the size of the substance molecules. How are they sized? Is it microfluidization or is it micronization? Purification may differ. Use of a certain resin may isolate different impurities, different substances. There's also the issue of the cell media broth that you may use to grow your cells, to grow your substances, and that all needs to be taken into account and captured in your scientific information. In the last few years, proteins have evolved to give so-called antibody drug conjugates, where you have a linker molecule with a payload attached to a large protein, a large antibody that will deliver your molecule of interest to a specific site. We also know in the vaccine world, adjuvanted versus non-adjuvanted vaccines are very important for the efficacy of that vaccine. Also, inactivated vaccines versus non-inactivated vaccines may give you different pharmacological effects, and we need to be able to capture this in our substance data. So that's all of those reasons lead to the need to capture the proper scientific data behind your substance. If we can move to the next slide, please. And as I've mentioned, the information you need to capture is very important. Think about what's your active moiety in your substance. The example we've got up on the slide, is it the polysaccharide? Is it your polysaccharide conjugate? Or is it your adjuvanted polysaccharide? Where is your active substance coming from? What's the relationship between those substances? How do you manage that relationship? I mentioned on the previous slide antibody drug conjugates. Again, that's important. Is your active molecule, your active substance, the antibody drug conjugate, or do you need to consider just a payload which is going to cause your tumor to be destroyed? We've got to think about that, and how do we capture all of that substance information? Once we have all that information gathered, how do we use it? What do we want to do with it? We obviously want to leverage that scientific description to produce better drug molecules. There's the need for, in the current world, AI, big data. How do we use that information to give you better drugs? How do you differentiate between biosimilars, between different pharma companies, as to what is the best use of that molecule, that substance? So if we go on to the next slide, please. So I've mentioned there's a need to manage all that scientific information. And as we were thinking about what do we want to do at GSK, how do we manage that complex substance information? We were drawn to using GSRS. It's for GSK, GSRS seemed to be a solution to help us manage that complex scientific information at the time we needed it, i.e. towards development, towards the clinical trials of it, towards understanding how it's going to be used in our authorized drugs. So it's not in our eyes, it's not a solution for research work where we have thousands of substances going through a day, but it is very, very useful for us in the development landscape. We will continue to use our research solutions for storing small molecules and large molecule information and giving them identifiers, uniqueness IDs within the company. But for sharing that data with a regulator, we need a more detailed solution that will contain all the information about the substance we want to to get authorized. We are aware regulators, authorities are looking to use structured data in our submissions. EMA and their XEVMPD solutions, if we're sending them documents, there's going to be questions back to us about what is the structure of the substance we're submitting. FDA are now thinking about using structured data. They're looking to get SD files or JSON files with the structures submitted to them. As you heard just now from Olof, the WHO global substance identifiers are beginning to become important to get across the same substances in the same drugs. And I'm sure other agencies will start using IDMP as a driving force to get that data. And I've mentioned, we can use the information for scientific initiatives, AI, big data, etc. I'm sure others can start using that public data to help develop better drugs in the future. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we started looking at a solution using GSRS. And with internally in GSK, we call that the SIMS program. SIMS is a substance information management system, and it's built on GSRS. So the vision within GSK was to master substance data that was stored across various systems and provide a single source of truth for that substance data. As a caveat, we'd also get support for regulatory submissions of that substance data in IDMP format. So we went about leveraging GSRS to develop our substance information management system, looking to increase our business activities efficiency, as well as create a solution that could be shared internally and hopefully externally with regulators. And our mission was to build our SIM system and make it operationalized by 2025. We would be able to support regulatory submission of data in a IDMP format once it was needed. We'd be able to access and implement our GSRS tool across our GSK landscape and begin to manage and master that substance data across all modalities, medicines, vaccines, and cell and gene therapy. So we had a vision, and we went forward, funded by our IDMP program, to begin to implement GSRS within GSK. Can I have the next slide, please? So within GSK, we were looking to deliver value beyond compliance. So not just store the structures, but have it really useful and used. So we have a process that once substances are identified as development candidates, so they've gone through all the research work, they're now identified as a substance we want to put through development, put into clinical trials, and hopefully make an authorized product from, we would start capturing the information. We'd gather the information at the start of the process, what type of substance it was, what information was available, and a trained team would start encoding and updating that information within the SIM system, within our GSRS system. We would reach out to project teams, SMEs regarding that substance, build the information, get additional information. So for a small molecule, that would be quite easy to do. For larger molecules, we reach out to the project teams, begin to get the information around the sequences, around, for proteins, any glycosylation, any modifications, for nucleic acids, linking sugars, the different phosphate groups, etc. And we build all that information up within our GSRS system. Once we had all that information encoded in the system, we'd reach out to our expert users and have them review the information, make sure we have it correct so that we could use it to support a regulatory submission. And then once we had that review and approval from our end users, we would then approve the substance in our system and make it available for downstream system use. it's aligned, the process is aligned to our project, clinical and regulatory triggers, which makes it very, very helpful to us. And we also align it with our other master data systems for things like key identifiers, external IDs and codes, and supplementation by generic names. Next slide, please. I'll just say a bit about our technical deployment. So we did deploy SIMS as part of our larger IDMP landscape. So it does fit with our other IDMP systems. For that deployment of SIMS, our technical group deployed it using the Azure Kubernetes platform, but we then added additional items to it. We've linked it to our single sign-on systems using Ping Federate. We've also linked it to our data fabric using the Kong API. We've also validated the system as GXP, so we know we can then use the information stored within the system for our regulatory submissions. One other key thing we did for it, we've built, because it's GXP, we've also built in a disaster recovery process. So if the system was to go down, we know we can get it back up and not lose data. And I think that's key for us going forward. The tech team also did some business enhancements for us, which have been really, really useful. They've added some additional business capabilities, which GSRS doesn't come with. So we have to have business approval outside of the system, but we've developed the capability to print a PDF file of all the substance information so we can share it with our end users who can review it and okay the data. We've also recently added a couple of other very, very useful new features to us. One is the ability, when we set approval IDs, we now set them not to the Unicode, but to our own internal approval code, our own GSK business ID. That's useful for us to allow us to do the internal work while storing the external codes as synonyms. And we've also set up the mandatory capture of a change reason if we modify an approved substance. So we have to know why that substance has been changed. And as part of all our work for our encoding, we've set up those business rules as part of our process. I think Olof mentioned that as well. Make sure you have the right business rules for encoding your substances. So we've set all of that up as part of our operationalizing the process. Next slide, please. So within GSK, we really do see GSRS as a tool to help us master our substance data. It's now part of our core GSK landscape for IDMP. The functional capability within the standard really does help us master all of our substances in one system, from small molecules, proteins, nucleic acids, and vaccines. Now we can have them all in one system for going forward in our development landscape. The integration with our other systems, like single sign-on, has really, really helped us make sure we can manage access correctly. And we're slowly building on some additional capabilities, such as the PDF export, to really help us along with our business workflows. Going forward, we really would like to have the capabilities to make sure GSRS can be used as a business tool within the pharma industry. The ability to have business workflows for reviewing approval would be very, very beneficial to us. One of the other things mentioned by Olof was, some kind of restriction management. So we would like to manage things such as our restricted compounds. They may be restricted for internal use because of a collaboration, or they may be restricted because they are restricted on a regulatory, they're a controlled drug. But that's another reason we want to be able to manage the data within the GSRS system on an ongoing basis. And as a business tool, a GXP business tool, we really need a human readable audit trail. I'm sure if a regulator came in to audit us, they'd want to see that regulated audit trail. That's why we're beginning to capture change reasons for every update we make on an approved substance. Next slide. Or is that the last slide? No. So in conclusion, GSRS has been very, very useful to us, and I'd encourage other pharma to think about using it to manage your development candidates. It can be integrated in your landscape. We found it, I won't say it was very easy, but we found we were able to integrate it into our landscape, get it GXP validated, and to build some small tools to help us use it. Further development as a business ready system would be very, very beneficial. And that's why we would really, really back a GSRS consortium between NCATs who develop the system, authorities such as FDA, EMA, WHO, and encourage industry collaboration to develop the system, develop its benefits, and develop sharing of information between all those groups. To us, I think it'll be really beneficial if we can share the information directly from our GSRS to a regulated GSRS. It would mean we know this information is going across correctly. There's no inference of when you take a document structure and put it into your database. We can readily share that information and answer the questions in a very facile way. And I think that's it for me. So I'll hand back, I believe, to Joe.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ian.
Cool.
I really appreciate that. If you go to the next slide. At this point, I will introduce Louis Hendricks, the founder and CEO of Global ValueWeb, who will lead our panel discussion. I would ask our panel members to please turn their cameras on at this time. And I would remind the audience, if you do have any questions, you can please add those to the question and answer feature within the Teams environment. And if you go to one more slide, next one, please. I'd also like to introduce that our third webinar in our series will occur on June 23rd, Monday, June 23rd. We have 2 speakers already slated, and we would invite every person who dialed in to please register for that event. Also, you'll be receiving a follow-up email with the same information to register. But again, in just a few weeks, we'll have the final webinar of this series. And with that, I'll hand it over to Louis.
Thank you, Joe, and really thank you, Olof and Ian. Am I audible in a good way? I thought that they were both very impressive presentations as such. Olof, you and I have worked together a little bit longer over the last time around the drug substance database, chemical, organic, traditional medicines, what have you. I really appreciate this presentation, giving the very clean layout of how the Uppsala Monitoring Center is working, relating back to the wedding cake. I noticed you really put the conversation about the global substance ID, the GSID and the PHP ID as such in a very, very clear way. You also make the very distinction between what is the standard part and what's the implementation part of the standard, like GitWig and SPOR is about implementations. I think your presentation has to go into the catalog as a refresher for a lot of people that get deep into digging into IDMP and GSRS and what is what exactly. I believe there's a lot of confusion in industry that I strongly feel that you are addressing in your talk. I think both of you expressed the why very much in a different way, though. The why from a UMC perspective, I noted down the ISO 11238 compliance, the classification, the substance master data that struck me very much as such. So maybe that's the first part I would want to stop. How is, and I think it applies for both, because our GSK sees the drug substance database as that tool of choice. When it comes to a topic of master data, are substances master data for drug products? A question to you both, and if you both could respond to whoever wants to go first.
I'll answer. I'll go first. Yeah, I think they are master data. If they're used in our products, I think they are. So I would say yes, it is a key part of our product data. Have we got the same substance in various products, especially if we're looking at adverse events? And I think that's true of excipients as well. Have we used the same excipient across multiple drug products, and do we need to investigate them going forward? In the case of FMD, for example, falsified medicines, that's a potential.
I understood, and you also say excipients, but Olof first, from your perspective, substance as master data.
Yeah, and if I understand you correctly, it's not that UMC in our database would have the master data from all the companies, and that's the only thing that should be used. Okay, so GSK still have their substances, and Pfizer would have theirs, and so Astra would have theirs, and so on. So when I meant master data, it was for our systems. I would, I'm not the technical guy, so maybe there's another better word for it. But what I mean was that if we have that, we use that then both for the global substance IDs and also in our WHO drug dictionary, and we have that as a hub with the data. But we're not producing any new substances ourselves, so we are relying. I never show that, but we get the information like from the regulators. As it is right now, we don't get it from GSK directly. That could be another possibility later on, but right now we get it that so the GSK first have to submit to regulators, but if we all do it in the same system, then it should be easy to do it later on. If they send it to the regulators, they can send a copy to us with the public data, for instance.
So I haven't challenged this one yet, this question, which comes to me now because we talk about substance master data, and the UMC gives the GSID as such. What is the possibility, likelihood, risk, or occurrence that what is actually the same substance already got several IDs in the ecosystem?
We have been discussing this a bit because it's also one thing that I brought up with that I think it's a good thing with this tool that it actually has a lot of validations, hashes within the system to check for duplicates. But I discussed it with the other colleagues, the FDR colleagues and so on earlier. Mainly it has to do like if you have company codes, for instance. They can actually mean the same thing, and it might not be that easy to figure out exactly what they mean. At least not for us, it's very difficult. And if I look at WHO drug and see where we have traditional, I have worked and had moose duplicates, it's like, oh, there were two company codes, it's mean the same thing. And there it's quite not that hard. But if you actually have the information to provide like a actual ID, when you do it in the ISO way, so to speak, that you have all the information, then it's then you should have that structure. So you should see that there are duplicates or potential duplicates. But when you assign IDs to, if you have to do it for like a concept or things that are, if you're going to do it for a company code, just assign an ID and not connect that to a structure depending on the information and how you do it and when you need a code, for instance, that could cause a problem. But I think that, and the FDA should probably say that, but I think they only have a couple of hundreds through over 10 years time that they've had that.
So possibly in a certain way, as the companies are advancing and using, just like what you're saying, Ian, how you use it as a tool and as a business tool, as such, which is very refreshing to hear, and the importance that you put on it. I think it's an excellent story to the audience here, and a big driver that this could be for the GSRS consortium. Combined with substances, are they properly identified? When we connect all the databases, if we were to be able to connect SIMs to regular authorities, but you could almost have like a broker systems between the life science companies and validating what is the same and what is different. I think we still would find a lot of overlap in the near future if more companies would go your way. And you would validate across each other. Do you see a merit in what I'm suspecting here?
I think that's a very good possibility. If we talk to each other and are using the same system, we could get benefits from saying, yes, let's work together to work out how's the best way to generate a fire message, for example, that is usable for all the regulators. If companies work together to do that, using a system like GSRS, will benefit. I believe we'll benefit from each company doing their own individual implementation.
In your implementation, because you had a lot of add-ons, very interesting add-ons, as such are really necessary for the GXP validation, the data fabric you added. You spoke about the business enhancements, etc., etc. So, how much of the GSRS that you started with is still recognizable as core, and how much is GSK now?
No, I still think the majority of it is GSRS. One of the things we didn't want to do was write lots of custom code, because as the next version of GSRS comes along, we want to be able to install that without rewriting and rechecking all of our custom code. We are writing small add-ons rather than major add-ons. We're not writing a whole business workflow because we think that will be very complex, and we'd rather get that done as part of a consortium where companies can agree what needs to be done for a business workflow. We've written little utilities that helps our business workflow.
Sort of standardizing on workflows potential.
Yes. So Louis.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a question in the Q&A from one of the attendees.
I'm not seeing it, Joe.
Okay, so I will read it for you, which is, what is the most practical approach to adopt IDMP for legacy drug products without being overwhelmed? I really appreciate the amazingly insightful sessions. Thank you. And that's from Pearl.
I guess from the GSK perspective, we did target our legacy drug products as high on the agenda to get in. So the active substances for our active drug products, we did encode. We haven't done it probably as fully as we would for a new substance. We've encoded what was available maybe in regulatory systems already or in the dossiers already, and just encoded that into our system. We certainly haven't gone as far as we would for a brand new product in the encoding. So for example, proteins, for a new protein coming along now, we would go to encode all the glycosylation, all the modifications. For an existing protein, we'd encode the sequence and some of the modifications. We wouldn't look to go and get the full glycosylation pattern, for example, unless it came up again in a new product, and then we would.
So for your legacy products, have you touched all substances, you think, Ian, in your organization?
We targeted all active substances, and we're looking to bring on all the excipients as and when we need them. The excipients are going to be harder because some of the colorings we won't be able to fully encode, for example.
That's one other thing that you now mentioned, that you already are working on the excipients. Olof, with the UMC, I think it's on your wish list to go there.
Yeah, it's all about use cases and resources and prioritizations, I would say.
Yeah.
That, the use case right now is there, but I think it's going forward, it will be. And if we look at what we have codes for, like units and SMSIDs, they are for excipients as well. So there are a lot, and that's like what I mentioned in answer to Pearl's questions as well. For the substances, well, don't create all of them yourself. Try to import them. Maybe you have to clean up the data from the US public instance, depending on what you want to have in there, because they have a lot of information, a lot of codes, different codes, and so on. But at least for the substances, it's a shortcut to get more into the IDMP way.
Can I just add to what you just said, Olof? Because one of these solicits we actually built as part of our building of our GSRS system internally was to do exactly that, to load data where we could from public GSRS. We modified some of the data to fit our business rules, but we've got the key structure, the key information in there, and then can enhance it for the rest of the information we think is required. So I totally agree with Olof. Where possible, take the public data.
Today, the public data is where it is in a wider ecosystem as more drug substance databases emerge within life sciences, within other regulatory authorities. We have a much bigger ecosystem to tap into. That brings a question. The GSRS consortium, open source is one thing, open data. Should that also be a topic in the GSRS consortium?
I don't know. Some data will always be open and some will be confidential, and we have to work around that. But the more we can, I think, just agree with different how we enter the data, then it will be like, then Ian and Marcel that raises his hand now, they could exchange data because it's company to regulator and leave us out, but different ways, I think.
I'd agree.
Thank you, Olof.
Marcel.
Go to Marcel. I see also Srinidhi has come. Srinidhi also raised one question earlier. Srinidhi, you want to address your question that you had raised?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Basically, I think Ian and Olof, since both IDMP is the substance part of IDMP as well as the CSRs, they originate from 1123 ISO, but yet we see quite a bit of differences in the approach and implementation. So at some point, some harmonization would be expected. I mean, I know that it's a long-term stuff, but typically, what is the current status and where do we stand? Otherwise, if it is implementing two different standards, so that like multiplying the existing.
Well, let's. I can try to start answering. I'm not sure but one thing I know that is like we're talking to each other about what's really in there. What you have in the system, and the S is also in the SPOR, but they also have, like Marcel will talk about next time, also the EUSRS connected there in the background, and then how to when you implement a standard, you can interpret things in different ways. That's also why I think this consortium could work as a forum for questions like this as well, because the SRS helps us to implement the standard. Even if the standard should say what it is, and then the system should follow. But when we implement and see this doesn't work, is it because of the standard or is it because of the system? So right. I think that working together in one tool like this helps us harmonize it going forward.
I'd agree with what Olof just said. I think, you know, as a group of people working together, there's understanding will come and you'll help move forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. Marcel, you had raised your hand when we were on that particular topic. Are you still there, Marcel, too?
Yes, I'm still there. Thanks. My comment was actually about, let's say, having public data, and I think it's important to have as much data as we can to have public. Of course, there are confidential data, that's IP issues and things like that, which I fully appreciate. But we as regulators have the duty to inform the public. The other thing is, if we've got, let's say, public standardized data, then everyone can see how this data is, let's say, dealt with. Scientists can use it and to generate new knowledge on this information. It can be used to feed all sorts of substance databases in national systems, in universities, in healthcare institutes. So I guess in that sense, it's important to have public data.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah, Marcel, that would also indicate that the consortium would have to think about what will be the right governance structure around that data. Otherwise, we might drown in data.
True, but we see that GSRS, our US colleagues, already have got public data. And also for EU SRS, it will be important to have a public database of all the substances in medicinal products. For instance, if a company would like to claim that a substance is a new active substance, they need a database to confirm that their substance is indeed a novel substance, so they could use that information or at least know what kind of substances that are on the market that are maybe pretty close to their proposed substance. So I think also in that sense we have got a duty to have a public database for us as regulators in our jurisdiction.
Very interesting perspective. Thank you, Marcel. Maybe you can request the audience, anybody else who would like to raise a question, please maybe raise your hands. I'm not seeing any hands coming up just yet. Ian, I come back to you with one question as you were talking about trying to make your GSRS that you could easily upgrade. So I think just a couple of months ago, there was a new version. Are you on the latest?
So we recently went through an upgrade about a month ago from, I think, GSRS 3.0.3 to 3.1. And that was a pretty facile upgrade for us to do because we were using the core GSRS code. We haven't got customizations in there. We've got a couple of small customizations to print what we call our print to PDF. So that's, we've got no major differences in our workflow. Like we haven't got a business workflow embedded in there. So it makes it easy for us to take what's coming from NCAT, upgrade, and add in our small little add-ons to it.
Thank you, Ian. I see we are at the time of this webinar. I thought it was very insightful. In the first webinar, we set a framework together with the ISO standard, Christian Hay, Marlene Kim from the FDA gave the insights deep into the GSRS where it is. And then the industry call from Pistoia Alliance. And I think Ian, I think he did great presentations on why